Welcome, Gemma. Thanks so much for coming on my podcast for the second time. How are
Oh,
you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly. All the better for seeing you. And yeah, really happy to come back on. It's lovely to chat to you always.
Oh, and I'm trying to remember, did we do our last podcast in person? You probably won't remember because you've done so many podcasts, but I think it might have been in person at the Penguin Studios, possibly, or maybe we did it on Zoom back in
No,
probably
we
2019.
no, we did it. That's right. We did it pre-pandemic and we did it in the Penguin Studios.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, I remember now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got this new book out. I'm going to show people who are watching the video. What a beautiful book. Get
Oh,
well,
thank
stay
you.
well.
I actually have one
Absolutely lovely.
too.
You've got one too. Good stuff. I've been loving reading it. It's so practical, it's so science-backed, and everything that you're suggesting in this book are things that are really easy, and a lot of them are free things that people can access. So I absolutely love that for this book and this work that you've created. Can you say a bit about what made you write this book?
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I wanted it to be science backed, but also I wanted it to be accessible. The reason for writing it was manyfold, to be honest with you. Having been a clinician and for 20 years, I had a lot of different bits of information, both in terms of study and practical experience that I felt I wanted to share. And in addition, I felt like a lot of the things that I had originally learnt throughout my medical training, I felt that there was something missing. And I've seen over the years as well in my clinical practice that there are more and more people of and younger ages who are suffering from chronic diseases, anxiety, depression, self-harming, and the patterns of how they're presenting is also shifting over the years. And I wanted to provide something that people could take away. In my 10-minute consultations, there's just not enough time to really get into a lot of these things. And of course, it's lovely to have that relationship with my patients and I can bring them back and I can arrange follow-up, but it's in some ways a little disjointed, and I wanted to be able to give people something that they could use, that they could help themselves with, that would be like a friend, that they could pick up, they could anywhere in the book they could open it and get something useful, but also they could use it to create their own wellness plan, because sometimes it's hard to put into practice the things that you want to do. Yeah, there's journaling pages and there's a specific plan that they can create in the back of the book, which was really important to me because sometimes you read something and it feels really inspirational, but then you put the book down and you forget it. And I didn't want that to happen. Yeah, I created it with many kind of things in mind: my patients, the wider community, and the environment as well, because I wanted people to feel connected to nature. I wanted people to feel connected to the planet. And what's interesting and perhaps unusual in this genre is being able to bring all of those different threads together into a framework that people can actually use in a practical way, which I didn't think existed before. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so many lovely exercises in there that are really effective, but also simple. There's nothing overwhelming in there. I think sometimes self-help books can be, I don't know, like the exercises are a bit complex, but I really love how you've made it really simple and accessible.
Thank you.
I I noticed one of the things that you share, and I've heard this from other sort of GPs that shared this, that about 80% of the patients that you'll see, over an average week, will have some kind of stress or mental health issue. And actually, that plays a big part of why they've come to the doctor. Is that right?
Yes, I think the mental health aspect of physical health is crucial and often overlooked. And interestingly, it doesn't necessarily mean that our physical issues are caused by our mental state, but rather that our physical issues can impact our mental state and can also, it's a communication, it's like a two-way street. When you're suffering, it is really hard for you to gain a different perspective on what your life means and where it's going. And equally, if you're suffering emotionally, spiritually, mentally, then that can also have a very strong impact on your physical well-being. So it's that interaction that I think is really important to recognize and is also really hard to address. We're all unique and we all have different life circumstances and different struggles and different things that we're having to deal with day to day, and coming up with a plan of action that suits everyone can be quite difficult. But it's really important to acknowledge that link between how our brain is working and what we're feeding our bodies and what we're surrounded by and who we're surrounded by and our previous experiences, and how all of those things weave in together to make a picture of our health. So I suppose in that sense, it would actually be nearer to 100% of my patients in one way or another.
Yeah, it makes total sense when you explain it like that. You talk in the book about medicine for body, mind, and spirit. So how does the spirit bit come into it for you?
So what I wanted to do in the book was to create a resource that would resonate with people regardless of their background and regardless of their ideas about what it means to be human. And I think that when we separate, as we've just discussed, the mind and body are connected. They have to be, because we use enzymes, we use hormones, we use neurotransmitters. And so these are all different tools that our body uses to help us make sense of the world and create thoughts. But there's obviously another element to it that I think is often overlooked again in medicine because it's very hard to define. And that sense of self is something that it's very hard to put your finger on, saying that's where it comes from, that particular part of the brain or that particular part of the body. And now, of course, there's so much more burgeoning research on the microbiome and how that impacts the way that we think and feel as well. And there's interesting research about how our hearts can impact our physiology and how we feel as well, like the different cells that actually create their own electricity within our heart and how that feels. And there's so many different aspects to our physicality that are as yet still not understood. And so I wanted to address that kind of more nebulous term of kind of higher self or spirit or soul or essence. There's lots of words for it, but it's not clearly defined in the medical literature. And I felt it was important to include in a way that felt inclusive, so that if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're Baha'i, if you're Buddhist, if you're Sikh, if you're Hindu, or whatever your religion, or if you have no religion at all, I wanted to bring in that aspect of the highest self, the self that watches the thoughts go by, the self that is aware of something more than the feelings that we have and the thoughts that we have. I wanted to bring that into the conversation in a way that people could hopefully find it, again, a very practical resource, which sometimes if you're just talking about a spiritual text or a religious text, or even just a psychological study or a medical study, it's quite hard to actually bring all those things together. And that's what I was aiming for in the book.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it, how to define what is spiritual or what spirituality is, and it's so individual, isn't it? I think for me it's like this connection to something bigger than myself or connection to greater meaning, and I do find things that help me to connect with that very helpful for mental health. And I wanted to ask you about Reiki. Reiki is something I've done, Reiki level 1, and I'm quite into Qigong, which is a similar sort of thing. It's working with energy. And I know there'll be some people who probably, tried Reiki, but other people might think, what's that about? That can't be real. But actually, you mentioned a study in the book that's talking about Reiki. What's your connection to Reiki? And can you explain a bit about how it could help?
Yes, and what's really interesting is that I think probably for the first time openly, I've talked about Reiki in this book, because it's not something I generally share on my social media platform, but it's actually become a really important part, or certainly one of my therapeutic tools. I trained as a jikiden Reiki teacher, so it's called a Shihan Kaku, and it's the jikiden is Japanese for directly passed down. And so it's slightly different in how it's practiced compared to Western style Reiki, which is what most people are very familiar with. But as you say, it's coming from a similar principle, and obviously it's coming from the same source. And Qigong also uses that same life force energy. And it's something that if you were to dissect a human body, which I have done, you can't find a particular sinew or muscle or part of the brain that shows you where that energy is, but you can very clearly see the distinct difference between when somebody has died to compared to when somebody is living, and the energy that you feel. Again, it's hard to define, but if you could try and look at it in terms of things like physiology, the electromagnetic frequencies that our bodies produce, I mentioned that our hearts have cells that can actually create electricity. That's how the heart beats, it's how it beats every day from before we're born to the moment that we die. And those electromagnetic fields are very strong. And in fact, you can measure that. There's a device called a squid, I think, what does it stand for? Something to do with like how it's able to pick up on energetic frequencies. And you can pick up the energetic frequency of the heart up to a meter outside of the body. And when you're around somebody, your heart rate variability can often change based on those frequencies that person is emitting from their body. And we have evidence objectively. We can measure these things with an ECG. We use electrocardiograms to measure the electrical activity of the heart. We use EEGs to measure the electrical activity of the brain. And we can see that those signals are far stronger from the heart than they are from the brain. And when you're talking about Reiki is a way of aiming to channel that physiological energy, if you will. And it's a way to express love, essentially. That's how I like to see it. Shioko Yamaguchi, who was the woman who helped to found Jikiden Reiki, she was taught directly by Dr. Hayashi, who was taught directly by Usui Sensei when he first created Reiki back in the 1920s. It's actually a very new tool. She talks about it simply as a way of expressing love. And that loving intention can be felt in the body and can be transmitted through touch. And if you are able to train to attune yourself to that loving energy, you're able to transmit it to others and you're not giving of yourself. So it's a very interesting tool because I think in some Reiki traditions, there's a big emphasis on protecting your energy and protecting yourself and not giving of yourself too much and it being exhausting and tiring. But in Jikiden, it's really that you become a channel of that life force energy. So you're not giving of yourself in any way. And in fact, it's more about directing that flow, if you like, towards the person that you're helping. And it's only ever a positive thing. So although people sometimes have different reactions to Reiki, there's never any negative aspect to it because it's given and transmitted with that love and that life force energy. I hope I've explained that. It's interesting.
No, it's fascinating. I need to get back into it because I kind of fell off the routine that I had. I had a really good routine of doing Qigong every day, and I would do it when I was lying down in bed. So it didn't take up time in my day. It might be like as I was going to sleep at night or something. And I swear I didn't get ill for a period of about 3 years, and I was doing it really consistently, and I slightly fell off. But this is a good reminder to get back on it. And our mind, it shows our minds are powerful. And it's interesting because, yeah, with Qigong and from the Reiki that I've done, obviously it's different to what you do. You can feel energy. It is feel real. You can feel it flowing. And sometimes it can make you, like I don't know if this happens in your type of Reiki, but sometimes it can make you jump or twitch or like sometimes people burp or something because like the energy's moving. Is that a thing?
It is a thing, and it's I don't like to gatekeep. I'm sure there are many very ancient traditions that have been able to also exhibit this phenomenon. When I sometimes, yeah, when I give Reiki, people feel different sensations. Sometimes they can actually feel certain like energetic things moving through their body. Sometimes they start to twitch and sometimes they start to writhe. Sometimes they just fall into a very deep sleep. All of which, that's just the way that their body has responded to it. And it's a really lovely thing to be able to give and also obviously to receive. But the beautiful thing, the reason I love giving Reiki is because I feel as though I also benefit from that life force energy. So it really is a wonderfully healing thing for me also to receive as I am giving, which is just lovely. And I have felt the same energy when doing Qigong. Again, it's something that everybody feels and perceives differently. But for me, I don't know if it's part of maybe my medical training, but there is that skeptic side of my brain, and I spent a long time trying to find studies that would either prove or disprove this way of healing. And there was an interesting study on women who'd had cesarean sections following birth, and they did a study where they gave Reiki to one cohort and they gave sham Reiki to another cohort. And sham Reiki is where they get an actor to do all of the same movements and have the same manner and the same sort of loving, caring approach. And they wanted to see if there was any difference. And what's interesting is obviously it's helpful to have somebody giving you love and care. It's helpful for somebody to be spending time with you. But the ones who received the actual Reiki were able to take less in terms of pain relief, and they had shorter hospital stays. And there was a definite kind of objective difference in their recovery, which is nice because it's very rare to be able to actually try and put that to the test, because it's not something that anybody would generally pay for as a study. And what's interesting is that Reiki has also been shown to be as effective for certain conditions. So there was a study on people who, I think it was herniated intravertebral discs, it was an issue with back pain. They were able to get similar results in terms of pain relief as physiotherapy. But of course, in the healthcare setting, giving Reiki is obviously more cost effective than giving physiotherapy. I'm not saying in every circumstance it would be the same, but that was an interesting study. They use Reiki as well as a adjunctive therapy for people who are undergoing chemotherapy in world famous cancer centres. It helps with dealing with side effects of chemotherapy and things like that as well. There's a number of things that it's proven to be useful for, which is wonderful. As to why, I think that's something that is as yet to be explained by the rational brain. But when I was learning, so I learned Western style first, and I've learned jaded style subsequently. And I haven't shared this before. We're friends. I'll share it with you.
Just us here, Gemma.
It's just us. It's just us. When I received my reiju, which is the way of getting attunement in this, I could see something that looked like steam coming off my body, my fingers. And interestingly, in Japanese, one of the ways that you describe the reiju energy is by describing it as steamed rice. And this is just how they say it in Japanese. And so when you're cooking rice, steam comes off the pan and you see the steam rising. And I kid you not, I could see steam coming off my fingers, and I was quite shocked and I didn't understand what was going on. And I said to the teacher, "Are you seeing this? Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" He said, "What?" I said, "That. There's steam rising off my fingers." And he said, "Oh, people don't usually see that." And he didn't really make much of a thing of it, because when I teach it, I never mention this, because I don't want people to think that them receiving reiju and not seeing this steam thing means that it's not effective for them. Anybody that does it can give it once they've been attuned, and it doesn't matter if you can't feel it, you're still transmitting it. So I don't tend to mention it, but I think I'm mentioning it to you now because I realize with hindsight that it was extremely helpful for me to see something unexpected that then corroborated the validity of what I was giving. Perhaps that's what I needed to see in order to continue with my Reiki journey. And interestingly, I also see it sometimes when I'm doing Qigong, and sometimes I see it when, it doesn't happen all the time, but for me, it was a really lovely way to actually show that there was something happening, and more than just the feeling, which helped me personally. But again, everybody's different and you don't expect to see that. I think it's an unusual thing.
Yeah. It reminds me of like how if we really believe in something, we're more likely to do it. I think so often we learn these things, then we don't do it. It's easy to not practice the things that we know will help us. So if there's something that can really show you, hang on, this is something that can really work, then you're going to stick to it more and put your energy into it. And then you are going to get the benefits from it. But it reminds me of, I often say this to clients, remember how powerful your mind is, whether it's energy, whether it's using your mind for visualization, hypnosis. There are studies into hypnosis and visualization that shows that wounds heal faster when you imagine them healing faster. People can have surgery under hypnosis. There are monks who can raise their body temperature. I don't know if this is scientifically documented, but I've heard from different sources that there are people who can sit in an icy cave, be covered in wet sheets, and can raise their body temperature to dry the sheets off their bodies very rapidly. Wim Hof, for example, he's done some wild things, getting an ice bath for 24 hours or something, didn't he do? And it
I don't
defies
know.
all kind of.
It does. It's interesting. I can't remember. I don't, I'd have to look that up, but I know that he worked, I think he worked with a university to try to show some of the benefits of the Wim Hof method. And I don't know if I think he exposed himself to a specific virus that would normally cause you to become unwell. I think that was one of the things that they tried to
Oh
measure,
yeah, yeah.
his ability to stave off this viral infection or something. But yeah, it's amazing the kind of things that we can do and how powerful we are actually. So yeah, it's one of those interesting phenomena, and I think it's one of those things I have been reluctant to talk about because there is in scientific circles there's a lot of stigma to things that are very difficult to quantify and measure. Trusting your gut or having a spiritual feeling or having an intuition, because there are so many other factors that can affect what you intuitively feel. And sometimes it's actually hard to trust what your body and mind are telling you, especially if you have a hypervigilance or a post-traumatic stress. There's certain things that you think, actually, can I always trust what my body is telling me? Can I always trust what my mind is telling me? And yet these things do persist, these incredible stories and these incredible ways that we've harnessed the power of the mind, the power of the body, the power of the spirit to heal. And I find that endlessly fascinating. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I love it. Pivoting slightly, an exercise from your book, which I absolutely loved. And if you can't remember this specific exercise, I'll get it from the book. And it's called the Meaning Maker exercise. Can
Hmm.
you share what that entails? I thought it was so useful.
Yeah, I love the meaning maker because it allows us to create a useful meaning from events that occur. And sometimes, or maybe even most of the time, the things that we worry about are not the things that end up causing us strife in life. The things that are the most challenging are often things unexpected. And it's hard for us to deal with those things. And sometimes we create meanings from those things which are not helpful to us moving forward. So, what I like about the meaning maker is it's a way for us to proactively create a meaning that is helpful to us moving forward. And I share an example of how to use it in the book. One of my patients, who I call him Jay, anonymized. He was having headaches, and I helped him with the meaning maker because I realized over time that his headaches were related to how he was feeling about some discordant relationships in his life. And on the surface, everything was fine. And I have to also point out that there are many other causes of headaches other than stress. And as a medical practitioner, it's really important for me to rule out serious causes of headaches. But in Jay's case, everything was fine. He had a good job, he had a happy family life, he'd had a baby not long before. But when we delved deeper into how he was feeling and the relationships in his life, he mentioned his father. And he was struggling with not having contacted him for a long time and not having been able to share in his new fatherhood with his own father. And there was a situation where he'd felt betrayed by his father and he'd felt used. And he was using very powerful language to characterize the situation where essentially his father had got into a lot of debt. He had issues with gambling and addiction, and he'd asked his son for help, and he'd lied to his son about the situation, and he'd taken money continuously from the son, who's Jay. And so he felt betrayed. He felt there was a huge lack of trust, and he'd blocked his father out of his life completely. And he was feeling even more resentful and sad since becoming a father himself, because part of him wanted to share the journey, and part of him also felt conflicted because he loved his baby so much, and he would never do the things that his father had done. And it took a lot of digging down into it for him to actually begin to realize that it's possible that this was playing a part in the headaches that he was experiencing. I said to him, let's create meaning from this. So we were able to come up with this way of actually writing down how he felt by removing the emotional words and just writing down the facts of the situation. So rather than saying that he had been betrayed, that his father thought that he was stupid, that how could his father do this, I asked him to write all the things down, the facts of what actually happened. And in the end, when he crossed out all of the emotional words and the other meanings that he'd given events, he was simply left with, my father asked me for money. And he realized that all of the other things that he told himself around that story were things that were making him feel really horrendous. And he didn't necessarily need all of these other parts of the story moving forward. And so asking him to think about how this journey had affected him and how he'd noticed anything about himself that had shifted, he told me that it made him really appreciate and value the quality of the family life that he has now. And it made him really appreciate and value integrity and value the love that he has for his own child and the love that he's surrounded by with his wife and family. And also made him appreciate the challenges of fatherhood, which he hadn't really appreciated before. And as he was writing down the things that he'd learned and the person that he'd become since facing these challenges, you could see a lot of the tension lifting from his body, and he was able to come up with a new way of thinking about how these experiences had shaped him as a person, which were actually quite useful to him moving forwards. And as a result of doing that exercise, he also decided to write a forgiveness letter to his father, which is another exercise from the book, actually. And with the forgiveness letter exercise, what's interesting is you don't need to give it to the person necessarily, and the person doesn't even have to still be alive if it's something historic, but it's actually a lovely way of finding that healing within yourself. And so he did both of them, and the next time I saw him, he was feeling a lot better. There were no more headaches, and he was feeling a lot more integrated in the way he felt about his life in general. He hadn't been in touch with his father again at that time. He didn't feel that he needed to, and he hadn't sent the letter. But in doing the meaning maker exercise and then subsequently writing the forgiveness letter, he just had a lot more peace, and he was able to look after himself in different ways. He was drinking less beer in the evenings, and he was noticing that he was more present with the baby during the day. And there's lots of different aspects that just helped him to feel a lot better day to day since doing it, which I thought was just so powerful.
So good. So useful. I actually had a situation recently where I used this exercise, and I'd received a text message from a friend who had taken ages to text me back and then had replied quickly. And my tendency is to assume the worst, to mind read and think, I've done something wrong, this person doesn't like me, blah, blah, blah. And actually just thinking about, what are the facts? Okay, they've texted me late. What are the other possibilities that could be happening there? Maybe they're just busy. Maybe they forgot. It's easy to forget WhatsApps. And I was ready to not give up on the friendship, but think, oh, they don't like me, so I'm not going to message them again or something. But actually just really examining that. And then we had a conversation about it, and it turns out they got all these things going on, and it was nothing to do with me, but I could have easily gone down that path. But actually just coming back to the facts and not making an assumption or not drawing conclusions that aren't there was really helpful.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many circumstances in our lives it's relevant for. So for the simplest interactions with people in shops or people on the road, even like when you're driving and road rage, and that there's so many little things that you could apply it to, not just your own sort of familial relationships or your friendships. It can be a very useful thing. And obviously there are limits to any kind of method, and there are certain abusive interactions and dynamics which it would need to be addressed in a very different way. But it's completely transformative when you can actually just look at things from a slightly different angle and take out the initial emotional reaction that you have, and then give yourself that extra time and space to come up with either alternative explanations or alternative ways in which you can actually move forward yourself, even if there is a mounting evidence, for example, that perhaps in one interaction this person isn't enjoying your company or has given sort of various tips that, not tips, but hints rather, that you've done something to upset them or done something to hurt them. Then again, you can you can use this tool then too, because it allows you a little bit more emotional objectivity and space to then, in a calm way, start having that kind of a conversation and understanding if there is something that you could have done differently. It really helps to take out that feeling of immediate judgment that you have for yourself or for the other person, which is very helpful.
Yeah, gosh, yeah, such a useful tool. So one question that I very often ask guests is, what's one thing that you're struggling with at the moment, and how are you handling it or moving through it or dealing with it?
Yeah, at the moment, I think I have to have a lot of gratitude because I am cognizant of the fact that during this phase of my life, there is nothing big that I'm having to deal with. There have been times in the past where I have had big struggles in my relationships, in things that I've had to do, in bereavements. My father died a decade ago. There was a lot to sort out with that, which was a very difficult time. My work partner died, and there was a lot to sort out with that. He was like a second father to me. There's been struggles sometimes with other relationships in my life, financial struggles. So there's been times where things have been very challenging. And this is not that time. There's no deaths, there's no big difficulties. So I'm very grateful for that. I think at the moment, it's probably a slight sense of inertia because obviously my book came out and I'm so happy with it. I love it. I want everybody to read it. But there comes a point where you think, oh, I've been promoting this thing for a while. I'm just really tired. I've lost my mojo a little bit. And work is getting very busy for me at the moment. Again, luckily, I've got a little bit of breathing space in my clinic because it's not the winter pressures. There's less people who are coming in with acute illnesses. But I think just juggling day-to-day life with two children, with a husband who's I have to maintain my relationship with him, with my boys, with my patients, with my mom, with my friends, and things like my wider mission, my writing, that can fall by the wayside, and it can feel a bit difficult to get the motivation to keep going with that because of so many other competing aspects in my life. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I can think of right now. And how I'm getting through it, I'm actually allowing myself to rest. I'm starting to say no to more things. And what's interesting was actually I had somebody come follow me in clinic this week who has read the book and is really passionate about it. And I expressed to her how I'd been feeling recently. And she said, you must keep your bigger mission in mind. You're changing lives, you're changing the world. And she was like my little pep talk girl. And it really lifted me. And I realized the power of sharing and also the power of community, because quite often I'm quite good at just dealing with my emotions alone. And I'm quite good at meditating, and I've got a morning routine that I like. And there's lots of ways that I use my own tools that I share in the book. But one of the things that I think I could use more is actually sharing with others when I'm struggling and allowing them to lift me in ways that I wouldn't necessarily think to lift myself. And she gave me a great gift. She was sitting in on my clinic and said how inspired she was and how amazing it was, which was lovely for me to hear. But she was the one that gave me the gift because she helped me see the power of day-to-day consultations and how they can help people. And she helped me to reconnect with my greater mission in life and the book and the podcasting and all the other things that I do. And that was a lovely gift. So I think, yeah, reconnecting with the power of sharing with others and being helped by others as well.
That's so powerful. It's so easy, isn't it? Because I think I can be a bit like that, to just think, get your head down, get through this period of whatever's going on, busyness or stress, and don't bother other people. I think if you're somebody that is used to helping others, it can be really hard to admit that you're struggling or ask for help. But sometimes you just need to hear someone else say, oh, I felt like that too. Or yeah, that little pep talk from somebody highlighting that you're doing a good job. Sometimes we just need to hear that. So I'm glad that you had that experience recently.
Yes, it was lovely. She was sitting in my clinic this Monday, so it was just a couple of days ago. And yeah, it did really lift me. Yeah, it's always good to be able to connect with others in that way, and it's nice to be reminded.
I wanted to ask you finally about the fact that you're known as the plant power doctor. And I'm wondering how plants and kind of plant-based eating fits into all of this. How does it fit? I know you obviously mention it in the book, but what role does that play?
For me, it's really fundamental to a healthy mind and body. And the first book, The Plant Power Doctor, was all about plants and eating plants and why eating a plant predominant diet and more of a whole foods plant-based diet can essentially reduce your risk of a multitude of diseases. That was a really important message that I initially wanted to share, and that's obviously the handle that I use on social media, the Plant Power Doctor. But I also wanted to share something a bit different with the second book, which is why it's a lot more around the power of nature and plants in other ways rather than just what we eat. I wanted to talk about the power of plants all around us, the power of plants in our environment, and how beneficial that is for our physical and mental health. And I could probably spend another hour talking to you about all of that, but I think to answer the question more directly in terms of why it's important to eat more plants, the biggest causes of premature death globally are heart disease, cancer, lung disease, and diabetes. Those four conditions cause 80% of premature deaths around the world. And 80% of those could be alleviated or prevented with four simple health habits: eating a plant predominant diet, moving your body, not smoking, and sensible use of alcohol, if you even drink at all. If you could basically do those four things, you're going to reduce your risk of 80% of 80%, which is huge. And the biggest of those four is what you put on your plate. 1 in 5 deaths globally are caused by poor diets, and there's many factors that are contributing to that around the world, many factors that are outside of our control, actually. But if they're not outside of your individual control in some way, if you're able to actually make a conscious decision to eat more healthy plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, tofu, tempeh, chickpeas, lentils, beans, herbs and spices. If you're able to actively put more of those things on your plate, then you are doing yourself a huge favour. You're slashing your risk of heart disease and cancer, which are the two biggest causes of death here in the UK. And you're doing the planet a favour as well. David Attenborough said that the biggest thing any individual person can do to help reduce environmental degradation is to eat a more plant-based diet. And there are so many ways in which that is the case, not least things like antimicrobial resistance, pollution of the waterways through the animal agriculture industry, degradation of the land, carbon emissions. There's many different ways in which that feeds through into our own health. So yeah, I think I wanted to share that in this book as well. In the first book, I didn't talk about the environmental benefits. I've mentioned that in this one, which was really satisfying to do. And there's still recipes in it as well. So I wanted it to be practical in that sense. And there's still delicious things people can make and hopefully feel inspired and add more plants on their plate.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, if the planet's not healthy, none of us are going to be healthy. It's like the foundational thing that we need.
It
We need clean
is.
air, water, and healthy food, and we need to look after the planet, otherwise we're all gonna feel it.
Exactly. And people also think, oh, maybe it doesn't affect us because we live in the UK. It really does. We've got the most polluted waterways in Europe, and we've got loads of native species that are dying out. And in fact, because of these like wetter winters that we've had because of climate change, our own wheat crops are at risk. I think there was a study that came out recently that said that we were at risk of a 40% drop of usable wheat crops for bread from the UK this year, 2024, compared to 2023. This is very real, and it's going to affect us in so many ways. So yeah, I think it's important for people to know that, and hopefully they can feel inspired, not too much doom and gloom. I want people to feel like they can actually do something different and help themselves and the planet. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I need to look at your recipes actually. I haven't made anything yet, but I will do. But my partner's getting really into different ways to cook tofu at the moment. We've both been vegetarian all our lives, so we're very well versed in tofu, but we started doing interesting things with tofu, like Thai style tofu, like covering it in a little bit of corn flour and putting loads of like garlic paste and herbs, and we're just having a great time with tofu, basically. It doesn't need to be so boring because
I love
plain
it.
tofu is so tasteless on its own, isn't it? You can make it so nice.
You're so right. I liken it to the difference between a plain boiled chicken breast and a chicken breast that's been marinated in delicious herbs and spices, and it's got that like crusty, sort of not crusty, that's not the right word. You've got that kind of crispy outside, and then it's more succulent on the inside. It's the same with tofu. If you just have it on its own, it's going to be super bland. But if you mix it with other things and you marinate it and you have different ways of preparing it, you can make it so delicious. And in fact, I really love using silken tofu for things like salad dressings and desserts because you're getting extra protein and it's the extra creaminess, but you've also got all the other different tastes and you can blend it all in and you just never know, but it's giving you that extra little health kick along the way. So yeah, tofu's
Yeah.
amazing.
I won't talk about tofu for another hour. I'll let you get on. But there's so many things on TikTok. My partner's always showing me like this mixed chocolate with silken tofu and it makes a mousse. And we made something the other day where we got like some dates and silken tofu and vanilla and it tasted like creme caramel, like almost exactly like creme caramel, but it was tofu. So
Oh,
it
I
was
love it.
very cool.
You're gonna have to
Yeah.
start posting these on your Instagram
Yeah.
page, Chloe. I want to see these
To become like
delicious
a tofu
options.
influencer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but
Oh,
actually, in all seriousness, I do have a QR code in the book where people can tap on it and they can actually see the recipes. Because one of the different things about this book is it's black and white. And so I thought, oh no, people won't make the recipes because they'll find it boring and they won't, it's always nice to see the food. So yeah, there's a QR code so people can see the food. You just tap on it and look at photos and decide which thing you fancy making.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to do that after we finish. Thank you so much for everything you shared. Where can people find out more about you?
You can DM me on Instagram. I am on all the channels now. I do have a TikTok account. I have X. I have Facebook page, Dr. Gemma Newman, and I have a website, gemmanewman.com. They're all different ways you can get in touch. And I'd love it, in fact, if you could go to gemmanewman.com, you can sign up to my newsletter and I'll be a bit more active on there. If there's any talks or events coming up, you want to come and meet me, it would be lovely to have a chat. I'm going to be at the Happy Place Festival in Chiswick this summer. So if anybody wants to join me there, I'm going to be at the Spa Fest as well at the end of August. Happy Place is mid-July in Chiswick, so come and join me, come and chat. I'd love to meet you. And if you live too far away and you can't make it, just send me a DM on Instagram and I'm usually able to see those.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.